All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Village of Lake Bluff Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole. It is Monday, October 12th, 2020. Could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Inkerman. Here. Trustee Charlo.
Here.
Trustee Dewart.
Here.
Trustee Markey.
Here.
Trustee Meyer.
Here.
Trustee Toll.
Here.
Okay, at this point in time, if there's anyone here on the line that would like to speak on anything that is not on tonight's agenda, please be recognized. Do we have anybody?
No, ma'am. And there's no one present at Village Hall either.
Okay, all righty. We have the consideration of the minutes from the August 6th and 10th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meetings. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Markey. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Charlot. Any additions, corrections? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Inkerman.
Aye.
Trustee Charlo.
Aye.
Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Okay, at this point, we are going to have a presentation and discussion regarding the stormwater utility. I'll turn it over to you, Drew.
Thank you, Madam President. The village has engaged Christopher Burke Engineering to perform a variety of studies for the village and give us guidance with respect to stormwater. I know you all are familiar with them. They've done the stormwater model that we've used throughout the community. Currently, they're working on creating an overland flow path through the East Terrace neighborhood. And they've also been working with us to guide us through the possibility of establishing a stormwater utility, which would create a dedicated funding source for stormwater capital initiatives. So tonight, we have Scott Griffith and Thomas Burke from Christopher Burke Engineering. Scott has Lake Bluff resident and consultant for the Village with Seabell, has helped us out a lot and has spoken to you all. So you're familiar with Scott. We're also having Mr. Burke here tonight. So Thomas Burke is an executive VP and head of water resources at C. Burke Engineering. He supervises a staff of 21 engineers. He has a BS in civil engineering from Northwestern and a master's of science in civil engineering and a doctor of philosophy from Purdue University. He's a registered professional engineer in Illinois, Indiana, and other states, and serves as a drainage consultant to several municipalities and counties, and he's taught many hydraulic and hydrologic seminars in the Midwest and throughout the country. So we're happy to have him here and to turn it over to our friends at Seabell.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Thomas Burke. Scott Griffith is with me. I want to kind of go through hopefully a relatively short presentation to answer questions anywhere along the way that you may have. Pull up the presentation right now. So the whole point of obviously is trying to fund a stormwater utility, and paying for stormwater assets, and how one way to do it is through a stormwater utility. So the first question is, what are the costs that are realized for stormwater that the village has to bear? Well, there's NPDES, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, Phase 2 requirements. This was stormwater put in place many years ago that the village has to implement, as well as many other ones. There's certain requirements they have to do every year. And there's also the village-owned waterways that they have to maintain, storm sewers that have to be maintained, as well as obviously capital improvement projects that Drew alluded to. So all these things are the things that the village has to deal with and pay for. What are ways to pay for all these stormwater costs? Well, there's obviously a tax, the home rule tax, a special service area, which has been done in places where if you want to put a cost for improvements for these 3 blocks, you can put a special service area towards them. A stormwater utility is certainly more a common way of paying for stormwater costs, or you can continue paying for the general fund. But the focus here will be on your stormwater utility and how would that be a benefit to the village. First of all, it's a reliable source of funding. It is it's a fee on every parcel throughout the village. It's a user fee. It's not a tax. It's been taken to court and it's been upheld. And the important thing is that each parcel, whether it's residential or commercial, is equitably assessed. So if you have more impervious area than someone else, they should be paying more because you have more runoff from your property and more runoff that the village has to address. It can be adjusted. So maybe the needs are high right now to make some stormwater improvements, some capital improvement projects. If those improvements projects are taken care of, you can lower the fee. If there are more projects to be done, you can raise the fee. So it doesn't have to be set as one time and set forever. It can be adjusted as time goes on. Certainly it can be used for stormwater projects. We've talked about capital improvement projects, certainly maintenance, equipment, and staff. And it's been certainly widely used throughout the United States. Here's just a map in 2020, a study that was done by Western Kentucky, looking at all the different stormwater utilities throughout the United States, over about 1,900 stormwater utilities. See, in Illinois, there's about 29 municipalities that are currently using the stormwater utilities throughout Illinois, both in central Illinois and northern Illinois. You can see some of our neighboring states have 133 up in Wisconsin, 97 in Indiana, 109 in Iowa. So it really kind of varies wildly, only 5 in Missouri, but they are used throughout the United States. I think I only see a couple of states with none in them, but it ranges significantly. So nothing new either. So the process of the stormwater utility, and we'll go through each of these, but it's evaluate what you have, try and set up a budget. So what are we trying to, what fee are we trying to collect for what, and determine a rate based on that budget. We conduct education and outreach, develop ordinances and policy statements associated with that. Really the education is an important part of it. How is the village going to bill the residents for the cost of it? And then finally develop the program, policies, and procedures in place. And there's a bunch of information that we can get into, but I'm just going to stay in the general portion of it, but please ask me any questions. So as far as evaluating existing data and procedures, the first thing we want to look at is what stormwater programs are in place. And then look at the desired projects. We're aware of many projects you have, from Scranton Avenue to West Terrace, Maple Avenue, etc. You have quite a few capital improvement projects that are desired to be constructed. You have a very good GIS, Geographical Information System, that we'll be utilizing to determine what the impervious areas are throughout the village. And then finally, everything that has to be done has to be, when we say regulatory nature, really must be with the stormwater purpose. When we look at this, we can't fund a sanitary issue with stormwater fees. As far as setting a budget goes, there's a program budget which can be zero, or it can be a portion of it. It's up to you. 6 minimum control measures, MCMs, minimum control measures. That's part of that MPDS Phase 2 requirements that I referred to before. Staff impact, if we feel that if you want to associate a staff member with this, so say somebody that does leaf cleanup, they could be, the fee for that, the cost for them could be associated with stormwater, since that is a best management practice. If there's a utility administrative cost, that can be tacked onto this as well. So there are some communities that have gone with zero program budget and put everything under B, which is what I'd call special project budget. Or some have done, 20% program budget every year associated with the cost of administrating it and staff, and then 80% towards capital improvement projects. It's really up to you. Some have just done, as I said, 100%, where all they're interested in doing is collecting the stormwater utility fee to pay for capital improvement projects. You have already done a lot of studies, so a stormwater master plan is another thing that could be done, as well as flood mitigation and flood studies, but you've already gone a long way with about a bunch of studies that have already been done. But should 10 years from now you want to update your master plan to see what projects have been done, what's outstanding, you can certainly use the utility fee for that study.
Could you go back? Could you elaborate on the MCM?
Sure. So 6 minimum control measures. That's part of the NPDS Phase 2 requirements. So there, 6 of them include education and outreach. So trying to tell people that when you dump oil into a gutter, that's harming the fish, it's harming your waterways, that you have to make sure there's no illicit discharges. If there are any, you have to eliminate those. You have to do post-construction BMPs, best management practices. So when a site gets regraded, they don't just like walk away, but they actually make sure that it's stabilized and doesn't run off, doesn't go away. So those 6 minimum control measures came out, remember what year? I mean, certainly more than 10 years ago, and they were an unfunded mandate by the EPA and locally by the IEPA. And so hence, since it is stormwater requirements, anything that associated with performing those by the village could be used, a stormwater utility fee could be used for that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that kind of gets us off and running here. I'm going to guess that we'll broach that a little more along the way. So, yeah, thank you.
Certainly. Any other questions on this so far? Okay. So, there's many different ways to do a stormwater utility. I'm going to go through the example of an ERU, equivalent residential unit. So we think of a single-family house, and every house in Lake Bluff is not always the same. So we looked at 3 different areas. We looked at East Lake Bluff, we looked at Terraces, and Tangley Oaks. We just said we're going to take 3 sample subdivisions and say, what would be the ERU, or equivalent residential unit? How much impervious area is there for each one of those homes? And in order to do that, what we do is we go in and digitize the roof and the non-roof impervious areas. What's non-roof? Driveways, sidewalks, anything that's within your property that is not pervious, is not grass. So here's an example. Here's East Lake Bluff. We took 5 random properties. Well, they're all next to each other. It's easy to demonstrate. And we digitized what the roof area was. And we have that shown in column 2. Then we looked at the non-impervious areas, as I said, driveways, patios, etc., and said, how much is that? And we calculated that. This is all in square feet. So, for example, parcel 1, 2,205 square feet of rooftop area, another 1,078 square feet of non-roof impervious area, for a total of 3,283 square feet of impervious area. We do that for all 5 parcels. And if you look at the total of them, 15,700. So on average, of those 5, the average impervious area is 3,140. Now, if you apply that for all of these Lake Bluff, you'd say your ERU for the homes is 3,140, ERU, equivalent residential unit. So each one is equivalent to about 3,140 square feet. That's East Lake Bluff. We did the same thing for Terraces. Took 4 properties in Terraces, 4 parcels, and did the same thing, rooftop, the non-rooftop impervious area, and the total. And this average of the 4 parcels here was about 3,300 square feet. So if you're looking at just at Terraces, it's obviously slightly more, but it's about 3,281 or 3,300 square feet. Finally, we did the same thing with Tangley Oaks. We took 4 parcels in Tangley Oaks, calculated the average, and again, the average went up a little bit here, where you're about 3,600 square feet. Now, why do we do this? Well, you have the choice then of taking this and trying to establish what your equivalent residential unit is for the village. And so we have a choice. We could take all 3 of those and average them, or we can take the lowest common denominator, which would be East Lake Bluff, and say, okay, the East Lake Bluff average was 3,140. And I'm going to assign that as 1 ERU equals 3,140 square feet. If I do that, then I go to the Terraces. Well, remember the Terraces average is 3,281. So each terrace average, every home in Terraces would be 1.05 ERU, or they pay 5% more than any home in East Lake Bluff. Tangley Oaks will pay 15% more than the homes in East Lake Bluff because, on average, their impervious area was 15% more. You could certainly combine the first 2 and say, well, we'd rather just combine some and make it more general. And so you'd round add the 2 of them up and say that one of them is rounds off to 3,200 square feet. So therefore, 3,200 square feet is my ERU. which case East Lake Bluff and Tangley Oaks would all be considered, East Lake Bluff and Terraces would be considered 1 ERU for every residential unit in there. And then Tangley Oaks, each home there would be 1.1 or 10% greater than those two. Obviously, another option is to do all 3 residential areas together. And all we're doing here is we're averaging up our ERU, or equivalent residential unit. In this case, we'd be about 3,300 square feet. So we'd say all these homes would just pay the same. They would pay they'd pay 1 ERU or 3,300 square feet. And why does this matter? Well, eventually we're going to have to look at non-residential, because when an ERU is stormwater utility is put in place for the village, it gets all of the non-government properties. So churches, schools, all commercial areas, all of those are considered. So we looked at one commercial example, and we said, okay, it's got a total impervious area of 23,824 square feet. And if we want option A, we're only looked at East Lake Bluff and East Lake villages and said that was 3,140. Well, then this commercial property would be paying 7.6 ERUs. If we average the first 2, it would be paying 7.4. If we average all 3, including the terraces, it would be paying 7.2. Not significantly different, but it would be a different number. And that's how we would do it for every parcel that is non-residential. You would average your residentials, and then you would take all of your non-residentials, including your schools and your worship, the houses of worship, and all those would pay a ERU depending on how much impervious area they have. So we would have to do this for all the village. We would get a total ERU, right? There's a certain number of residential houses that would contribute ERUs, certain number of non-residential would contribute ERU. We don't know that number until we do the study, but that would give us a total number of ERUs, or equivalent residential units. Just to give you an example, this isn't, again, something new. I've listed the 29 that were shown in Illinois. And if we look at these, so there's all the different communities are shown on the left. Then it shows the fee type. And each one is slightly different. But if you looked at it, a T refers to a tier system, where they have it broken out into different tiers. F is a fixed rate system. I don't mean to make it more complicated, but they have different ones. A is a fee per parcel acre. They decide to do it per acre, which is like Buffalo Grove. And then E is the ERU. So anytime there's an ERU shown, for example, Decatur and Eureka, it shows you what the ERU is they established. And then there's a monthly fee, the year they created it, if it's known, and what the population is. Well, I realize a lot of these populations are quite different than Lake Bluffs, but it gives you some idea of what they are. So another example is Highland Park, Hoffman Estates, etc. A lot of these are ERUs. Some of them are the tier system. And then the D there is a 2-level system, residential, commercial. So if you're not confused, I'm not sure who wouldn't be at this point with all the different ways. And on top of that, you've got someone like Northbrook who bases it all on water usage. So anyone using the amount of water you use in Northbrook is how you determine how much you pay for stormwater utility. It's certainly not defensible and something I would never suggest doing. But there are a couple of communities that have done it based on water usage. It's obviously a very simple way because the village already pays or already assesses fees associated with water. So here we have a couple more: Morton, Normal, Park Ridge, Peoria, that are all based on ERUs. And you can see the ERU depends on each community, has a different value for it based on a study that was done. And finally, we have some more. Again, Rantoul is a fixed rate. Bridgeton Park is D, which is a 2-level system. And then Rolling Meadows, Tinley Park also does water. Rolling Meadows, and most of the rest of them do the equivalent residential unit. Wilmette actually does something, even a hybrid of these, where they have a tier system for residential. They actually have it broken into 3 tiers. The middle tier is about $12 a monthly fee, so they're paying $144. Some homes pay a little bit more, some homes pay a little bit less. And then everything that's not residential is based on the ERU. So this is a wide range of numbers. Winnetka has the highest rate in the state Illinois, $21.83 per ERU, billed on a monthly fee. Lowest is probably Wheeling, is $2 an ERU, but you can see there's a wide range. I'll scan back through them. $8 in Highland Park. Again, Northbrook's not the same because it's based on water. So again, I think the $2 is the lowest, and yeah. So if you look at just ERU, $2 is lowest, and $21.63 is the highest. Downers Grove established theirs about 10 years ago. They're $11.43 for their tier system. So going back to this, though, what does this really get? So we look at Winnetka. It's probably, I don't know if it's the best example, at $21.83 a monthly fee, but that generates about $2 million to $2.5 million. Again, that's based on the number of ERUs they have, but it's a close proximity as far as residential areas, 12,300 population. Rantoul, which again is on a fixed rate system, they bring in about $750,000 a year through their stormwater utility fee. Richmond Park, and again, I don't know how much commercial Rantoul has, but I'm guessing it's larger than what Lake Bluff has. Richmond Park is just a two-level system. They bring in about $400,000 a year. Rolling Meadows is about $860,000 a year. So anyway, just give you some rough idea of that.
Let me just make one quick comment on that. I'd be interested in hear your thoughts on this, but so we represent Winnetka, which was obviously the last court decision. They upheld the ERU system. My assumption has always been that the ERU monthly fee is related not only to the population, but also to what that town is doing in its stormwater utility. I mean, Winnetka has a, $70, $80, $90 million project that it needed to fund. I know Wilmette also has a, $30, $40, $50 million project, as opposed to some other communities that are just doing, maintenance and smaller projects, and so don't need as big a fee.
That's correct. We worked on both Winnetka and Wilmette.
Yep.
Currently working Wilmette, and you're absolutely right. So the Winnetka was looking at putting a tunnel in at the time was about $48 to $55 million in addition to the other projects that they have listed. And so you're right. How they came up with that monthly fee was absolutely based on, and this I would recommend the same thing, is you look at what projects you want to get done, and this is what we've done for other communities, and we look at over what period of time we want to accomplish them, and over what period of time, you can even bring in people work on bonds to say that if we're going to pay this off over 30 years, what should we be charging now to accomplish that? And maybe one project doesn't get started for 8 years from now or 6 years from now, and we can plan that budget. And you're absolutely right. The amount you charge isn't whatever you feel like. It should be based on a study that's done that says we go back all the way to the project budget. So what capital improvement projects do you have, and what are those costs? If you want to bring in other costs as far as the program budget under A, you can, but absolutely usually the biggest factor is what is the capital improvement projects that want to be done. As I mentioned, we're obviously familiar with quite a few of those, and there's a wide range of costs associated with those. Other questions or comments?
Tom, I've got one question, and it's more out of curiosity. I don't know how much practical usage you would actually have, but some of those communities that you mentioned that have utilities tax in place are similar to Lake Bluff in that we have the houses that you base the ERU on are pretty much standard houses in Lake Bluff, but we have quite a few outliers as well. Houses that are 10,000 to even, we've got one that's 28,000 square feet in town. Are those all paying the same one ERU, or is that part of the tiered system like Wilmette has?
My suggestion is that we would look at a threshold that if we're going to go with one ERU, so I went back to the example of just here, there's decisions the village has to make. Option A is you take East Lake Bluff and say, okay, everyone else is based off this. So if we were to do that case and somebody was, the example you gave of one home, I don't know the number, but for easy math, let's assume it's 9,420 square feet with their impervious area. So they would be 3 ERUs. They wouldn't be 1 ERU.
Even if it was based in East Lake Bluff.
Yes, if the village, so the village can either say we want all homes paying the same thing, or we want a range so that anyone greater than anyone from, we had examples here of 2,500 or 2,850. Here's one that's 2,698. So we had range of about 2,600 square feet to over 4,000 square feet roughly, 4,700. So the village could say, we anything less than 5,000 square feet, we want everyone paying the same thing. And then above that, it should be multiple factors. So I think if someone's double that, they should be paying double what that home is paying. I don't think it's equitable for someone at 2,850 to be paying the same thing as someone who's got 3-4 times the impervious area. But you can always make it simple math if you want and just say every one. So my recommendation would be to break it out.
Okay, so we would then need to digitize each home in Lake Bluff and get each impervious surface in order to do it that way.
So we can tell pretty easily. So when we just did this for the presentation, but typically what we'll do when we look at Tangley Oaks, it's not necessarily 4 homes next to each other. We do this for presentation purposes, but we can take usually about 6 to 8 homes, and we can get a wide range. But you can also see, looking in the aerial pretty quickly, if there are major outliers. And so if the village agrees with that, that we're going to have a range, an acceptable range, then anything that's above that outlier would be a multiple of that base number. We can determine those pretty quickly without having to do every single home.
Okay. And then finally, are there any communities that do a ratio of impervious surface? Because, speaking of some of these estate homes that are the outliers, they're also on much larger lots that have a lot more pervious surface to drain. So can you do a ratio instead of straight impervious surface calculation?
A ratio of site area?
Yeah, let's say a ratio of the impervious surface to the total lot size.
So there is absolutely, there's a way of doing that where you're looking at, absolutely, because there are some homes, so what happens is you could have a parcel that has actually no impervious area on there, and they would pay the lowest fee. And then the one with the highest ratio, so you'd break it out less than 10% impervious, 10 to 20, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, say anything greater than 70% ratio would pay the highest. There's that is an option as well.
This could be as blunt.
I have a question on that.
Yeah. I'd say could be as blunt or as sharp as we want it to be. It can be, you can account for even existing subdivisions such as Tangley Oaks that have stormwater detention facilities already built in. They can get credits for that. Right, Thomas?
Well, Drew, you just alluded to what my question is, and I don't want to unduly complicate this, but particularly when we're looking at a subdivision like Tangley Oaks, or if we're looking at something like commercial, to be fair, I guess I'd raise the question of whether we give credit for existing things like retention ponds and so on.
And so we have developed ordinances with and without credits, and it's not uncommon to give credits. The one caveat I want to say is ahead of time is if you start giving credits, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, is you want to make sure that the detention pond is up to today's standards. You give it credit because they are holding their stormwater and releasing it at a lower rate than what they would otherwise. But once you start giving credit, that dollar amount that you're trying to get to achieve to do projects A, B, and C, you're going to have to end up with a higher cost per ERU because you are giving credits. If that makes sense. So
I understand. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And I would just say, Bill, the credits, I agree with everything that was just said about, what it can do to the expenses. But if there's ever a court case, the credits helps a lot because because it shows that the fee is directly related to the runoff from the property. And if you're providing credits to something that's reducing runoff, it makes the ordinance far more defensible.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I had in mind, in the back of my mind here, and I'm thinking of, larger and particularly recent commercial developments being able to, well, essentially be fair to them, to be fair to everybody.
Well, and not only that, I would argue that it would also encourage builders, particularly to do those kinds of projects on their property, and perhaps reduce our need for stormwater mitigation in the first place. I mean, of course, we're not going to eliminate it, but perhaps if every developer and every homeowner had a little rain garden, we certainly wouldn't have the problems that we currently face.
Yeah. Do you give credit? I guess you begin to beat this to death, but there are semi-impervious surfaces for driveways and things like that come to mind. The other question that I had, Tom, was how do you account for differences in topo? For example, we've got places in Lake Bluff which are kind of in a belly. We've got places in Lake Bluff kind of like where we live, where we're sort of at the bottom of a long incline. And the water tends to start at Green Bay Road and come all the way down, and it kind of hangs out at the bottom and whatnot. So the folks up at the top really, their water retention is not real high, and the people down at the bottom have a little more retention. So is that ever factored in?
It's typically not factored in. What we find, though, is that the places that we have to do stormwater improvements are the ones down at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking the people's water down the bottom as well as the people up on top to try and solve, if there are flooding problems, to solve that. But it's not typically factored. Topography is not typically factored in a stormwater utility.
Okay.
Mr. Burke, I had a question about this complex system that we're developing. I know the tool can be as sharp or blunt as we want, but let's say we develop something that's kind of right-sized for us, and it has maybe a couple of different tiers and some other credits that are being offered. There's a constant change in the village in terms of what happens on each property. It won't be significant, but at some point we would need to reevaluate and kind of, check the veracity of the numbers and so how often would we have to do that, and what would be the cost of kind of constantly reevaluating at some intermittent points in time?
So the best practice is once it's established is your building department is connected to this so that any changes to a parcel, assuming someone's getting a permit and getting a permit for what they're doing, gets reflected and updated once a year for those changes. And then probably every 5-6 years, you probably want to just take a look. And it's not a very expensive or long, detailed thing to try and take a look and see if there are things that have changed significantly that have been missed. And you're not going back in time; you're just going forward, trying to do that. Now, obviously, there's enforcement. That's a different issue. But I'm talking about trying to make sure there's nothing significant to change, which I would think most things haven't. But if the building department is constantly giving any updates or changes to building permits, that's the best way to catch it, assuming that people are getting permits.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question as well regarding. So fine, we're putting a utility fee in action, and if I look at your spreadsheet for Eureka, that has an ERU also, and they have a pretty similar ERU that is $32.50. They are getting a monthly of $6 fine. So what kind of projects do we fund with that? What's the capital outlay, and that is how do we plan for the expenses afterwards?
So usually you work backwards. You know what the costs of the projects are that you're trying to do and the time frame you're trying to do it, to work backwards to get an ERU. I think you've raised a good point in that one of the things you want to put in there is not just the cost of the project, but maintenance of the project over time. It's obviously a smaller cost compared to the capital improvement project cost, But if I'm understanding your question right, you want to have something to keep up maintenance of this new installation.
So maybe I should have phrased my question in a different way, because I mean the basic point is when you look at the community, they are all different size and all different location compared to water, and so on average, I mean, what are the kind of projects or what kind of costs per? I mean, if you have it to normalize it per population basically, but where do you start? What kind of costs do you consider to actually fund it with such a utility?
The first cost you consider are the capital improvement projects that I listed before. The projects that the village has already studied and they have some cost estimates for them. You decide that I'm going to do project A, I'm going to do project B, and do project C over a certain time frame. And with those, for example, those three, it could be 2, it could be 6 projects.
Oh, no, I'm very clear with that. But basically, you're answering with a how, but my question would be on how much. So let's say for a community of Eureka that is similar to Lake Bluff in quantity, would you consider a $2 million project funded over the next capital expense-wise over the next 5 years, or a $10 million project? So this is the kind of basically approximation I'm looking for.
Okay, so I have no idea about Eureka. I don't know how many. While we know that their ERU, equivalent residential unit, is 3,250, I don't know how many units they have. I know we can look and see it's 5,300 people, but I don't know how many people they have. So I don't know what their total income is per year. I gave some other examples of what the ones were. I didn't find Eureka easily available, so I can't really answer that as far as what projects they do.
Eureka was easy because it was fairly similar to Lake Bluff, but I'm completely open to any other example.
So the other example I gave was Rantoul, which again, while it's the right size population, I assume, I don't know how much commercial they have, but they were bringing in about $750,000 a year. And another example is Richton Park, which is bringing in about $400,000 a year. I don't pretend to know what projects they've done or what projects they're paying for or planning on doing, but it just gives you some ballpark of the cost. $3.43 for Rantoul. They obviously have only 13,000 people, yet it's bringing in about $750,000 a year.
Question for Drew that might help on what we're discussing right now. Drew, what is the current annual expenditure or historic annual expenditure for the last couple of years that we'd be able to attribute to stormwater?
It varies greatly, and it depends on the last few years. The village has done very significant capital infrastructure projects, but that's only recently the village has had monies to spend on this based off, I've talked about this before, the land use approvals that the village has granted years ago are paying dividends today with the amount of dollars being generated in sales tax the village can put towards capital improvements like the East Terrace improvements that were done on Sheridan, and then the Lincoln stormwater improvements. But it varies greatly. But I would say this, that it is probably a good question for Jeff Hansen. If you recall that the village on an annual basis invests about $750,000 in its road program. And that is the number that the village has come up with based off our total lane miles and the price of asphalt, how much we should be spending to stay on top of our infrastructure to keep it at the level we want it to. And we've talked about how much the village should be investing in its water infrastructure, but we have not had that conversation about what should the village be investing in its stormwater infrastructure. And so
I think answer to that question, or at least a study on that, might give us a good piece of data that would help answer Mr. Charlot's question and help us go forward.
Exactly, and that would be if Thomas, if you can go to the slide where you talk about the process, the steps. I think the idea, at least in my head, was that if the committee of the whole is comfortable with the concept and comfortable with establishing such a utility is having the finance committee, but probably referring this to the finance committee to continue to study and develop these a lot of these questions you guys are asking, right? And that would be revolving around number 2 is setting that budget, right? We know that there is the $15 to $20 million deep tunnel project going out North Avenue. We know that there are, you all recall the Skittles map from the budget conversations of all the localized flooding that would be part of that grand solution and that total list of projects. Some of them we have good planning numbers for, some of them we don't. But we also know we talked about the East Terrace solutions. We know there's a lot of projects that we can add in there. Then you throw in the idea that we have X number of linear feet of stormwater pipes that are of various ages that we can expect that we should be replacing or planning to replace or line, numerous sections of that a year. So that budget number can grow very rapidly. And I suspect that if you, Thomas, if you go back to the list of communities with their various equivalent rates and the numbers, I suspect most of those communities did not design a utility monthly fee revenue stream that covered 100% of the cost, because that would be a very scary number, I suspect. I could be wrong, Thomas, you can tell me I'm wrong, but
I agree with you, Drew.
Yeah, so the idea, most of the time, most communities look at this as a supplemental revenue stream, a dedicated revenue stream, and you look at these are pretty recent within the last 20 years, sticking their toe in the water to start trying to get a dedicated revenue stream to pay for something that never has had a dedicated revenue stream or any other operational dollars attached to it, whether it be a utility fee like a water bill or sanitary sewer fee, because we're billing on those already. So it is something that gets going that you can spend a lot of money on, and as we know that the standards for stormwater are constantly changing, so there's a perpetual need there.
I just pulled out the project list, the 10-year summary that we had through the last budget cycle, and the list of capital projects showed that in FY 25, 26, and out, there was a storm sewer trunk project that was $2.9 million. That's kind of on that, hope to fund and do in the future. So, I mean, that's one identified project that, would qualify.
If I remember, I think that's the first piece of that trunk that goes, working from east to west. But that the big number is probably closer to 15 million, right?
Right.
And there's numerous feeders coming into that system throughout the east side and even on, on the west side of town. So all that feeds into that.
Thomas, in these communities, how is it usually billed? It says monthly fee, but we bill the water quarterly. So would it be just attached to a water bill, or would this be a separate bill that our residents would bill?
No, that's a great. Go ahead.
It's with the water bill, so it's billed quarterly. But for comparison purposes, we break it out into monthly.
Got it. Thank you.
And we.
I'm sorry, Aaron. Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I'm done.
Done. I know that somebody mentioned schools in there, and I was just wondering if places like schools and the park district and the library, are they exempt from this fee, or are they also paying this fee? Drew, maybe you have some understanding of how other communities are doing it.
I would ask Peter Friedman on that one.
Yeah, no, those public entities are paying. Now, they are paying because they have some of the largest impervious surface of anybody. So if, but there, at least in Winnetka, there's a provision that allows a reduction in the amount if there's joint projects that the village and the school district or park district or whatever the other governmental entity is that has a facility in town undertake. There's a provision that allows them to agree to some reduction, but the impervious surface ERU calculation definitely applies to other government entities.
And you may not know this, but the village itself pays a property tax fee to a drainage district. I mean, so we're not exempt either. We're not completely exempt as an entity ourselves.
I have a question also to Tom and maybe Drew. What has been the reaction of communities that have adopted a utility fee like that as part of a water bill? What has been the feedback from the community?
So, this is Thomas. In my experience, most of them have, there's certain trepidation by passing it, moving forward with it. Once it's passed, it's other people most of the time are understanding why it's being done because they want to get some projects in the ground. For example, Wilmette right now is in the midst of building some large projects. Winnetka has done some, and they got some others planned. So typically people will see projects going in after this is put in place and understand what it's for. And if we've not, from my discussions with many communities, there's not a lot of pushback after it's done and once people see what it's being used for.
Thank you, Thomas.
Question for Peter Friedman. If we have a stormwater utility, does that preclude us from one of these special service districts if that should be appropriate?
No, not legally it doesn't preclude you. I guess it would depend, the devil's in the details of what you'd be doing with the special service area.
Okay. Thank you.
I took the opportunity just to punch up here in Google. There's an article here in the Peoria Journal-Star about Eureka, and it appears that they are generating about $21,000 per month, or about $260,000 per year. They have projects that they had identified on the order of $5.2 million, and they wanted to fund this over 20 years, which matches up similarly, I think, to the concepts that Tom was talking about and Drew was talking about in terms of setting up what the projects are, what the project life is, how if you use these funds to support a bond issue, for example, for a particular set of projects and those kinds of things, which is, it appears that's what Eureka has done as well. And I'm going to guess that that's maybe not too far away from the scale that we're talking about here. And they're at $6 per unit for single family and $6 per unit in a multiple family, and then commercial is multiples of all of that, as Tom has pretty well explained. So
yeah, I think that, Mark, I think that comes down to how comfortable is the village willing to set an aggressive rhythm, or right, the idea, or in the period of time. You referred to 20 years. The village is celebrating its 125th, right? The village,
right.
We've been engaged in stormwater management to some degree for the last 125 years, and I remember previous village board members have talked about, are we looking to solve this problem in 5 years, even though it's over a century in the making? Or are we looking to spread it out over time, right? And
Exactly.
So that'll be a good conversation, I suspect.
Well, you've certainly got two scales. One is the project scales. You resolve all this in 5 years, but pay it over 20, or how far you spread the whole projects. I mean, clearly, we've got some rather painful situations here, and I'm not sure that we're prepared to recommend that we not address those for over the course of 20 years. But it doesn't preclude us with managing the financials in such a way and spreading those out. And how we choose as a financially as a board to spread those out and what the actual total number is there are a lot of moving pieces here.
Any other questions for the gentleman?
I guess what's the next step? Do we need to agree as a group tonight to continue exploring this as an option? And Drew mentioned sending it to the finance committee to
if you thought, right, you're right. If you wish that we wish to continue this, we could drop it right here. or do we wish to continue this and explore the various options and see what might be the best fit for Lake Bluff? And I would then suggest, as been stated, that we send that back to the Finance Committee to take that exploration and able to present to the entire board its recommendations. Is everyone in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just make a final opinion that, you know, I am sensitive to adding any taxes or fees to our residents, but at the same time, I respect the fact that this is for a designated use and funds very important capital improvement projects that we are contemplating and have been for quite a while. So I think it's a good program and one that we should move forward with.
Okay.
And
Anyone else?
I would just like to add, when the Finance Committee is looking at this, just to maybe keep in mind that not only will there be and I think it's a good idea as well, and I think it's a great way for us to fund these things going forward to keep the village safe and up to date on their water issues. But not only will people have a fee on their water bill, but also too that pass through for the schools and the other taxing entities. People will be putting in a little bit more in their property taxes, I think, for that. So we might just want to be cognizant of how we manage all that.
Anyone else want to add? All right. So,
Can I ask a question, Madam President?
yes, certainly.
So and from a timing perspective, is this something that the village board would like to see done as part of the next budget cycle? The idea to define or establish what the ERU would look like and the structure of this, so as to have it ready to be established within a time frame. And Peter, help me out here in terms of, it seems to be procedurally, it's the passage of an ordinance.
Correct.
So there's nothing unique in terms of referendums or holding hearings. There's no requirements for that. So just from a timing perspective, and so from a planning perspective, is it the village's goal to have that as part of those conversations, as part of the new budget that, you know, usually we talk about at that time, new revenue sources, whether it be new fees or other things, to have that part and ready to go at that time?
As far as I'm concerned, I'd like to see that, but what does everybody else think?
I think Mr. Burke could probably address whether that's an attainable goal, because there does need to be some research before that, but I think that would be ideal to have it in place before the next budget cycle.
Mm-hmm. Everybody else okay with that, pursuing that goal?
Yes.
I believe, Madam President, this is a great goal, but we also need to be clear on what we need to achieve on the other end. What will be the type of total budget we need to satisfy? I mean, what are the water issues among the list of many water issues we have to resolve? What are the ones we'll seek to resolve in the short term, and I mean by about 5, 10, 20 years?
Agreed. I think that's whole part of what we call the package on this one.
Yeah.
Is to look at everything and then make some specific recommendations that we think are attainable and are in the best interests of our taxpayer.
Agreed.
And we do have the ability to reassess strategically what those projects are, and at the same time adjust whatever utility rate we choose. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we may choose to address the viaduct, let's just say, and then the state miraculously comes in and says, "We'll take care of that for you." I'm just looking at
no, that's right.
Two
that's
really
right.
big bookends here, folks. But
thank you, Pollyanna.
Well, no, but understand.
No,
what I'm saying
I
is,
get it.
My point is that circumstances change, the board's direction changes, and we have the ability to change how we manage the funding for that.
Just like the water rates.
It's not locked down. We looked at water rates every year.
Right.
And I guess in a way this is sort of a microcosm of that, because when we look at water rates, we're looking at
Operations and
capital
capital.
projects. We're looking at operations and all those kinds of things, and we're trying to figure. And we've got the incoming rate is a variable as well. So not so very different, really. It's just kind of beefed up, and it's something we haven't done before. So I'm pleased, and thank you for Christopher Burke and for bringing this and giving us a really concise presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, is there anything else that's needed on this? Drew, does you and the administration know where to go from here?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
All right, and thank you, gentlemen, from Christopher Burke. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Very much. Good night.
Thank you very much.
I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Toll, and a second.
Second.
And a second by Ms. Ankerman, and we are adjourned, and we will see everybody back.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Everybody do what you have to do.